Hello everyone, this is Here's Trivia, and today we're continuing our Guanqiu Jian's Conquest of Korea Let's Talk Lore series with episode 3, titled The Goguryeo Incursion. Before we get started, here's the answer to our trivia question from the end of our last episode, and be sure to stay tuned until the end of this episode for a brand new trivia question. Now, last time we ended with the conclusion of the Wei attack on Gongsun Yuan, where the Sima Yi-led campaign completely crushed Gongsun Yuan and his briefly self-proclaimed Kingdom of Yan. In the direct aftermath of this campaign, Sima Yi thought to make an example out of the Liaodong region in order to discourage others within the Kingdom of Wei from thinking about rebellions against the kingdom. So in addition to executing over 2,000 local officials, generals, and officers who worked under Gongsun Yuan, Sima Yi also executed every male civilian over the age of 15 who resided within Liaodong's capital city of Xiangping, which amounted to an additional 7,000 executions. Then, with the skulls numbering close to 10,000 heads and lost souls, Sima Yi constructed a Jingguan, or a pyramid of skulls, to stand as a monument for his military success and as a warning for all those considering future betrayals. However, this was not enough, as Sima Yi also wanted to drain the Han population from the entirety of the Liaodong region, as he did not trust their loyalty to Wei, given the prolonged rule of the Gongsun clan. Therefore, in order to completely eliminate the possibility of a future rebellion in this distant and isolated frontier territory of the kingdom, Sima Yi organized for the forced migration of over 40,000 Han households from the Liaodong region, a decision that would undo centuries of Han migration and settlement in this area, as these 40,000 Han households would be relocated to the Qing province in the south, where they would go on to live on military Tuntian farms to help bolster the food production and military conscription for the Kingdom of Wei. Now, aside from those who would be uprooted by this forced migration policy, Guanqiu Jian, who was still the prefect of the You province, was the one most unhappy about Sima Yi's policies in Liaodong, as the Liaodong commandery fell under his jurisdiction. This massive drain of Han population in this frontier region will not only weaken the economic output of this commandery, but also put its safety at risk, as it was surrounded by a multitude of minor foreign kingdoms that have historically coveted this Han-controlled territory. Furthermore, once the military campaign was over, Sima Yi and his western garrison forces would leave the You province after a brief respite, as they still had to return to the western front. This meant Guanqiu Jian was left in charge of carrying out this unpopular forced migration policy, even though he personally disagreed with it, as the entire process of relocating these families would end up taking years. Originally, Guanqiu Jian had hoped that his stay in this rather poor and dangerous frontier province would have been a short one, as he had ambitions of becoming Cao Rui's legacy building general. But two things would greatly alter Guanqiu Jian's career path. First would be his inability to bring down Gongsun Yuan in his solo attempt in 237, and the second would be Emperor Cao Rui's sudden death in January of 239, shortly after the conclusion of the Liaodong campaign. The combination of these two events will leave Guanqiu Jian stranded and trapped out on the northeast frontier as a mere prefect for a total of 8 long years, as he lost most of his political connections with Cao Rui's death, as neither of the two new co-regents in Cao Shuang and Sima Yi, or the new child emperor, Cao Feng, shared any meaningful connections with Guanqiu Jian. And in this period of political stagnation, Guanqiu Jian would often express his frustration through poetry, as we can see from some of his surviving lines of poems that he wrote in this period, where he often lamented how he felt alone, shouldering the heavy burden and mighty responsibility of defending the northeastern border. And it was during this period of Guanqiu Jian's rule of the You province that Wei saw increased border aggression from the Proto-Korean kingdom of Goguryeo, or Goguryeo as they would be known in Chinese. And just as a reference, the map here will show what the various neighboring kingdoms are known in English, Chinese, Pinyin, and Chinese characters, as these names tend to get confusing as we switch from one language to the other in this series. Now, more importantly, as the rest of this Let's Talk Lore series shift to cover a bit of Proto-Korean history, I want to first state that as a non-Korean myself, I do not read Korean. The main sources I'll be using will be the Book of Han, the records of the Three Kingdoms, and the Sanguk Sengi, or the History of the Three Kingdom, a Korean historical text that was first compiled in the 12th century and is often credited as one of the oldest Korean history texts on the orders of King Indron of Goryeo. Now, the Three Kingdoms here in question are not Wei, Shu, and Wu, but rather the three Korean kingdoms in Silla, Goguryeo, and Baekje, which would go on to eventually subdivide the Korean peninsula until finally a period of Silla unification. Fortunately for me, the original text of this Korean historical record is actually written in Chinese, a language that I do understand as a native Chinese, as Chinese was the official written language of the Korean courts until the 15th century, when the modern day Korean alphabet was created and later developed into the writing system that we would call Korean today. So, given that I'll be sourcing from primary sources from both the Chinese and Korean side, I hope we can avoid some of the potential nationalistic arguments in the comment section below. Discussions and questions are, of course, welcome as long as they remain civil. And should you have a particular disagreement with any of the points made, please leave a comment below, and I'll happily provide some sources or my rationale behind these points. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's first start by giving a brief history of the Goguryeo and their interactions with the Han population in this region. According to the Book of the Han, the first mentioning of the Goguryeo happened in 117 BC to describe a native tribe that resided in 3 counties of the Xuantu Commandery, with one of these counties bearing the name Goguryeo, which means settling on high ground, and this meaning will eventually evolve in Korean sources to go on to mean high castle. According to Korean sources, the Goguryeo would be officially founded in 37 BC when a refugee prince named Drumong from the northern Buyu or Fuyu kingdom escaped to this area in Han-controlled territory and go on to establish his own kingdom, which would eventually become the Goguryeo. Either way, in the early periods of the Western Han Dynasty, the Goguryeo was a small tribal power that largely resided as an ethnic minority in the Han commandery of Liaoxi and Xuantu, which was populated by a variety of different ethnicities and minority powers. Violent encounters between the Goguryeo and the local Han population would start in 75 BC, when the Book of Han recorded that separate tribal groups called the Yemek, or Hui in Chinese, made incursions into the Xuantu Commandery from Goguryeo's held land. Then in 12 AD, with the fall of the Western Han Dynasty, the Goguryeo would end up breaking free from Han control as they would revolt and break away officially from the Xuantu Commandery. But eventually, with the re-establishment of the Eastern Han Dynasty, the Xuantu Commandery would eventually strike back at the Goguryeo, as we have records of Gongsun Du serving in the Xuantu garrison forces in his youth and battling with the Goguryeo forces, as they would be successful in defeating the Goguryeo and forcing them to submit once again as a vassal state to the Han. Now, according to Korean sources, by this time period, the Goguryeo had actually already expanded to become up to 5 separate tribes, as they would absorb much of the land controlled by their neighboring kingdom of Yemek. And when the Chinese sources believe that the Goguryeo had been submitted once again as a vassal to the Xuantu Commandery, in reality, it was only one of the many tribes that were now called the Goguryeo. And I tend to agree with this assessment, as later on, during Gongsun Kang's reign of Liaodong, the Goguryeo would once again come into conflict with the Han population, when they attempted a western expansion from their native land, as their native land were mountainous and not arable, while the Han had control over most of the arable land in this region. However, this expansion effort would be poorly timed, as Baogi, or Boqi in Chinese, the older brother of the Goguryeo king, Samson, would actually defect to join Gongsun Kang, as he promised vassalage to the Han if Gongsun Kang could provide his forces to take the throne for himself, as he felt cheated when he wasn't selected to become the next king, even though he was the eldest son. Now, in the fighting that ensued, King Samson would be able to defend his crown and kill his older brother, but Gongsun Kang would end up personally launching attack on the Goguryeo capital city in 209, as he would end up burning down their capital of Ganne, or Guanqiu as it was known in Chinese. Furthermore, as the aftermath of this conquest, Gongsun Kang would end up establishing a new commandery named Daifang to the south in order to establish better control over some of these minor kingdoms in this area of the Korean peninsula. Now, on the other side, faced with the destruction of their capital, the Goguryeo would go on to construct the Huando, or Wandu Shancheng, a mountain fortress that would surround their capital, as they attempted to utilize the local mountainous terrain to improve the fortifications of their rebuilding capital. From this point on, the weakened Goguryeo state would remain largely submissive to the Han, and later on wait until the conclusion of Wei's campaign against Gongsun Yuan, as now with most of the Han population moving out of the Liaodong region on Sima Yi's command, the idea of western expansion into these arable land resurfaced again amongst the Goguryeo, and starting in 242, probing attacks and settlements into the Xuantu commandery begun under the orders of the Goguryeo king Dongchuan, or Wei Gong as his name would be known in Chinese. And these moves culminated in the successful siege of the Wei fortification at Xi'anping in 244, which finally got the attention of Guanqiu Jian, as in a direct response to this attack, the Wei Goguryeo War would officially begin. And to find out the result of this war and how it would eventually lead to a grander Wei campaign deep into the Korean peninsula, come back next time, as we'll conclude our series tomorrow with episode 4. So hopefully y'all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or simply support the channel by leaving a comment below, or just by hitting the like button. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!